Hey everyone, welcome to the AfricanMusicLaw.com show. This is the 169th episode, and I'm your host, Miss Uduak. We'll get started very, very soon. Before we do that, I want to welcome our very first time viewers or listeners. If you're listening via podcast and this is your first time, welcome. And if you are viewing this and this is your first time, welcome again. What do we do here? We're all about empowering the African artist. That artist has expanded. It used to be just more so focused on the music industry, but it's expanded to include creatives at large. And of course, not only the artists, we also empower the creative industry at large. And specifically, we zoom in on the African continent. And the African continent and Africans across the entire diaspora, wherever they may be found, we're all about that business of empowering through education, through legal commentary and analysis, like what I'm going to do now, or business commentary and analysis for this particular episode, although I will add legal to it as well. And in addition, we also bring in some of our community members and experts to share their insights and, of course, provide more education and elevating the entire music and entertainment ecosystem. My full name is Uduak. Uduak, I go by Miss Uduak, and I am a fashion and entertainment lawyer. Been practicing for at least 20 years now. I almost forgot. So practicing for 20 years. The bulk of my work is a lot of trials or litigation work, and I also do a lot of deal making as well. So for the most part of 2021, we've had a lot of interviews throughout the entire 2021, a little bit of roundtables discussing the business side of the industry. Excuse me. And then on the tail end, what I've wanted to do and have been doing is the solo one-on-one legal commentary and analysis, primarily based on the fact that you all, are viewers and listeners, really like that aspect. So we've been covering a lot of, cases, going into the courtroom, seeing what the filings, the pleadings are on all kinds of different cases that have been filed both within Hollywood and outside of. In this particular episode, what I want to do is zoom out of the courtroom and just focus in more on the business side of entertainment. And so we're going to see it particularly manifested through discussing Wizkid. If you're not familiar with Wizkid, I'll give you the full rundown pretty soon and what we'll be talking about today. Before we do that, let me just tell you how to participate and how you can stay interactive with us throughout. First things first, if you look at the bottom of your screen, you should see where it says you can scroll. The scrolling banner that's going on, or the ticker that's saying leave your comments in the comment section. And what I'll do is pull it on screen so that people can see and read your comments as well. If you have questions, please feel free to ask as well. Shout out to William, Gary, who's a regular, and a few others who come in from different areas of the country and also outside of to be a part of this. We've been going strong as a brand for 10 years now. Started off initially just more of a blogging website, expanded to include podcasts, and we have a new reiteration coming up in 2022 that I can't wait for you all to be a part of and also announce once we get closer to it. All right. So, what else should you know about the brand and how to be involved? First things first, go to africanmusiclaw.com. And on that website, you can learn more about the brand, who we are, what we do, how to get in contact if you want to do business with us or you are interested in appearing on the show as a guest for 2022. I'm not taking on new guests for the year. We're wrapped up with guests, but 2022 for sure. And any other kind of interactions you want to have with us, including if you're interested in sponsoring the podcast or interested in sponsoring the live streams as well, please hit us up. Happy to hear from you. In addition, you can subscribe specifically, and you should see that also with the ticker. You can subscribe to the show on all major streaming platforms. You can find us on Spotify, Apple Music, you can Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, Ghana Music, which is out of India, among so many other platforms that we are. We are on all major streaming platforms. And if you're like me, I love my Google Play. So you can also find us on Google Play as well. Don't forget, with respect to the Apple Podcast, leave us a rating, leave us a positive rating on how you've been enjoying the podcast and the value that it's given to you. We certainly would love to have that rating, because one of the things is apparently it's tied into search engine optimization, where when people come and they type in and say, the business of music and entertainment law in Africa, we would come up in that top search. But if they're not able, if you're not leaving ratings, it certainly affects the ability for our show to be found. So please would appreciate that as your reciprocity for the time and value that we put into creating the shows. All right, so I think I've covered the basics that I want to cover with you all, and we are ready to talk about Wizkid and his recent performance at the O2 Arena in London. It was a 3-day concert. Certainly, one could say, well, there's sort of lots and lots of high-end profile celebrities within and outside the USA that are performing all the time, and I've shut down the O2 so many times to count. So, what's the big deal about Wizkid performing? I mean, why do we have to have an entire episode on it? And the big deal is that it's an anomaly with respect to the African side of things. In fact, it's the first time it's happened where you have a 3-day concert as opposed to one, and not only a shutdown of those concerts, but an immediate sale of tickets. Under first sale was at roughly under 12 minutes or about 12 minutes. Second sale of the day two announcement was sold in 2 minutes. And the last set of tickets was sold roughly about 35 minutes. And you're looking at tickets of over 60,000 tickets purchased. And when you compare that to the US, very, very few celebs have been able to achieve that, from your Beyoncé's. And of course, also, if you look at the UK and others, Beyonce's, I believe Rihanna as well as in that, Rolling Stones, among others, like top 5 or 7 people that have been, 7 bands that have been able to accomplish that. So it's really, really a big deal, needless to say, on a global front, and certainly a big deal as well on an African continent front. And what I want to do, if this is the first time you're joining us, is sort of make my way through an overview of how this has come about, right? So it's a collective effort to get to this point. They always say it takes a village to raise a child. Certainly in the music industry, it's not one individual action, although some few artists, Burna Boy is one of them, that's been known to say, Africa didn't necessarily help me, but it is truly a global collective effort or village that is helpful in bringing any artist to that kind of limelight. So I'll talk a little bit about Wizkid's trajectory. And then on the flip side, what I do want to talk about that is an issue and keeps coming up, and I think it's important given the role that Wizkid is now going to be playing on a global scale, is the issue of Wizkid when it comes to relationships with women, and particularly the allegations that have come in the past with respect to assault on women or threats of assault. And in this instance, we see it come up despite this amazing success and amazing event on stage, the allegation of harassment on women, particularly one of his featured artists, who is Tems. And so we'll take that. Her fans get mad. Wizkid's fans get mad. There's a whole clash about it. And we'll tell you why that even happened in the first place. And some of the things and tips that you as an industry executive advising your clients, and certainly you, the talent, if you're watching this, or just all stakeholders, you should be thinking about these things throughout. Now, before I officially get into the conversation, let me just preface it with this. I am a fashion and entertainment lawyer, as I said, but I'm not your lawyer. And yes, I do trial work, but I'm not your lawyer. And yes, I do deal making. I'm not your lawyer. This is just for informational purposes only if I'm discussing legal issues. And certainly that disclaimer is warranted. Now, if you have your specific situation and you want to talk to me about it, feel free, if you look on the screen here, to visit fashionentlaw.com. That's my law firm website. And I'm happy to have a conversation with you. Just simply schedule a consultation and we can take it from there. But for all intended purposes, this is to the general public and information that's been given, especially when we get into the legalese on the side of the allegations that are being made. Okie dokie. All right. So Wizkid, who is Wizkid? You probably have heard of him, but a lot of people have heard of him. But in case you haven't, here's Wizkid for your purposes. All right, so that is Wizkid, and we are getting ready. And you've probably heard the album or the song Essence everywhere. It's been on the Billboard charts. Last week we talked a lot about it and the Grammy nominations and the whole controversy over him being snubbed for a Grammy in the category that specifically he was nominated, a global album as opposed to Song of the Year, Record of the Year, etc. So let's start first with further discussions on that. So the specific event we're talking about is Wizkid's O2 Arena Made in Lagos concert. And so far, so good. The media is reporting it more so as a 3-day residency because it was a 3-day concert. Ended up being more like a residency, although technically not necessarily marketed and promoted in that sense, but essentially ended up being that way. So 3-day concert. Again, I already explained to you all how quickly it sold out. One of the highlights of the sale how quickly it sold out. Again, I mentioned 60,000 tickets selling in minutes, and day 1, day 2, day 3, I wouldn't belabor the point on that. However, one of the things that really, really was also a highlight of that amazing concert so far, and you can watch it on YouTube as well. We talk about some of the partnership deals that were involved as well in that. So one of the really, really good things that was cool about it is Wizkid went all the way back for his fans. So his 2011 Superstar album that was under EME Records with Banky W, a staple in Africa's music industry, who left New York, moved to Nigeria, decided to start a record label, and at some point signed Wizkid, who Wizkid was known as the studio rat, always hovering around a lot of other music talents, trying to get in the studio and then getting in the studio, working nonstop, and ultimately caught the attention of Banky W. So this is a condensed version. He signed him, groomed him, A&R, the whole 9 yards, and gradually got him onto the global stage. And with endorsement deals, of course, the quality of the songs that Wizkid was producing, among other things. And so with that, one of the biggest albums, and I remember interviewing Wizkid for this particular Superstar album when it dropped. So his 2011 Superstar album dropped, and he certainly performed a lot of songs from way back Rumor for the fans, Holla at Your Boy, and the list goes on from that. He also, in his 2014 album, you saw him performing as well for this concert, his Ayo album. And I think his Ayo album is where you have the Ojuelegba that really put him on the map, had a lot of American artists and Canadian, Drake, for example, jumping on and doing some remixes to that song. That song was very, very, very instrumental in really putting Wizkid on a global map. He also performed sounds from the other side. That was his 2017 album. That was an interesting album. There's a little controversy around that because it was when Wizkid was trying to cross over, sign a major record deal. And the question was what his sound style would be going forward and how his position in the marketplace will be. Even the naming of the album for African fans was sort of like sounds from the other side. What the heck is the other side? Why can't you just have a title that made more sense? The album, I don't know that it was as successful as other previous albums, but I do know that one of the songs off that hit single was Come Closer, among others that he did. And I think that featured Drake as well, if memory serves me right. So he performed, songs from that. He also certainly performed 2018 Wizkid album as well, performed songs from that. And then his 2021 Made in Lagos, particularly Essence, among a few tracks he performed. And when you watch the quality and caliber of the performance, number one, the presentation prior to that, actually the hype prior to that, DJ Neptunes did such a great job in getting the crowd really, really ready and worked up. And DJ Neptunes really took it old school from Afrobeats with all kinds of amazing legends and their hit songs over time. And then sort of created that impetus, that excitement ultimately before Wizkid came out. And Wizkid came out with a very grand entrance. And it was just amazing excitement. I think when I've watched the clips on YouTube and also watch the actual YouTube partnership with the O2 Arena and Wizkid to stream, one thing that really strikes me is, wow, this is a very, very, very young contemporary industry. Particularly, let's zoom in on Nigeria, where a lot of the Afrobeats is coming from. super young industry, and what it's been able to accomplish by itself through bootstrapping. So by itself, I mean the entire ecosystem, but ultimately no funding from, external sources, really just each man for himself bootstrapping and collectively getting to this point is remarkable. And then to see a homegrown, truly made in Lagos talent that has been able to be propelled on a global scale, again, really off the backs of a lot of the local music entrepreneurs putting in the sweat equity, putting in the capital, among other things, to get to this point. It was just remarkable because you see the room or the arena, and it's full of all this thousands of people from diverse walks of life. And then you even have American celebs that flew out there to participate, to be a part of it, and they were sharing, their experiences on social media and Instagram. It was just a very, very humbling experience as a stakeholder being a part of that, and I'm sure other stakeholders as well. Like, wow, it's so amazing to see that Africa is owning its narrative. Number one, I think that is really the bottom line: owning its narrative. Number two, showing that we are marketable and we are able to bring in that profit. I mean, we've always known that, but others doubted that ability. But that also showed that, and then seeing that, wow, ultimately, we know it's something I've been saying over and over again, but ultimately, Nigerian music, Afrobeats going global, and seeing the world, like starting first with the continent, then, Europe, then Asia, then North America, now just gradually becoming a part of it and infusing themselves into the lifestyle and incorporating it. And for a lot of people, it wasn't my experience for sure, but a lot of people in the West that have said to me, fellow Africans, that they grew up not wanting to be African because there was a time period where it was not cool to be African. The sense of pride they have, and their children now, or family members or relatives that are super proud because they can show their culture, among other things. So this is beyond just the music and the performance. It truly is about impacting culture, changing culture, and critical claiming or reclaiming the African identity. Now, one of the reasons that got me into this entire African space you're seeing, independent of what I'm doing as a practitioner, a legal practitioner here in the States, one of the things that got me into this was my frustration. So, my background is as a fashion model turned fashion entertainment lawyer. And I would get on the runway and everybody would say, "Oh, you're so beautiful. You're this, you're that." Da, 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 da. But then when I got off the runway back into my local community, the things I would hear about Africa was just mind boggling. It never made sense to me. And a lot of it was a depiction of what what's Discovery Channel said about who Africans were, right? So walking around naked in some foresty, crazy place with a rotunda stomach and flat butts and flies all over. This really, really negative perspective, or savages, or just really horrible perspective. And before social media, from the Facebook to etc. popped on, Africans really were still relying on the West to tell our stories. No one really, really gave us that opportunity because they had the media machine, the West, and so they painted our narratives globally until date. I mean, as much as we've been taking control of our narratives, for the most part, you still have very, very negative perspectives of who we are. And the music industry is instrumental in changing that, and also the film industry, for particularly out of Nigeria. So you see all of that, that sort of trajectory of our identity really, really just in the gutters of who we are. And finally, you have new technologies, new media, and we start reclaiming that first with the bloggers, right? The African bloggers living in the diaspora, having and wanting a need to connect with the continent, begin writing stories and telling stories about their experiences, or sharing more modern perspective of their realities back when they were in Nigeria, or when they visit Nigeria or other parts of Africa. And before you know it, slowly but surely, this just cut up a storm. Kenya, covering its own, Nigeria, Ghana, South Africa, everybody just writing and creating this whole pool of content that was saying and presenting a completely different narrative of who we are and who we say we are, not what who you think we are, but who we say we are and how we answer to and what we answer to. And of course, that came also with realizing huge demographic, what roughly about 1 billion people now. So if you are in the content space, if you're in the entertainment space, there is no way to compete uh, in this century and the next one that you can leave Africa out. The youth population, the access, which we're still working on, obviously, but access to internet and just the different ways of accessing content. I think it was inevitable, and we all knew it as stakeholders that no matter what, you're going to have to come to Africa and deal with Africa. So again, seeing where Wizkid is and what he's been able to accomplish with that 3-day concert, it's not just about him being on that stage, performing, having a great time, his fans getting into it. It's what it presents, what it means on the local and global music map on a global scale. What does it mean for us? Now, if you're following the trends, if you're following what's been happening in the industry stateside and outside of, you're realizing when it comes to distribution of music, particularly the whole streaming wars that's happening with all the different streamers, that all of that is now or has now moved also to the African shores. So technology and particularly digital distribution, I think ultimately did take us in terms of the industry and our talents to the next level. So it took us in the sense that what ended up happening was you have all this, let's say Web 1.0 bloggers, writing and creating content and exposing our music and our creative arts as a whole. And then you had a new reiteration from the bloggers to social media and users of social media, the African fans themselves, African citizens themselves, really carrying the torch in who we are. And then you do have this new reiteration, if you will, of streamers and technologists coming into the place, including Western technologies, among others, and making it easy to distribute our content. And when you have that and that distribution of our content, our artists can be heard. And if our artists can be heard, then there's a different conversation about not only them being heard, but then the monetization of the content that they're putting out there. And I think that all of that collect in addition to our public relations folks, in addition to record label owners, in addition to our fans and our promoters, everyone locally and globally doing their parts to really get us here. And a very, 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 very strong African diaspora in the UK for sure, and certain parts of Europe. And of course, here in the US, you have mainly New York, Houston, Chicago, LA, and Atlanta for sure as some of the major stumping grounds. And we saw that too when you started to have stakeholders like Peter Okoye of what's the One Music Festival, who I think had at some point, not I think, he for sure took out the Barclays Center, rented that venue some years back and did the very first major concert, if you will. And for that attendance had over 15,000 people back in the days that came to hear all of our African artists, major African artists, talents perform, which was an indication of what was to come. And then repeated the same thing in Houston as well. So it's been a long journey to get to where we are, and it's a remarkable journey. It's something we should absolutely be certainly very happy about. And again, congratulations to Wizkid on that major success of what he's had and the impact on the culture that I was just talking about. Now, the thing I want to highlight about Wizkid is he didn't just get there. And also, he's someone who is very big on putting others on. So even with his concert, the 3-day concert, he had all kinds of guests. He even had Chris Brown, who has not performed for over 10 years due to the whole shenanigans that had happened with Rihanna. But he gave Chris Brown the opportunity to perform after 10 years that he hadn't performed in London. In addition, he had a lot of newer talents from Buju to Tems, as I already talked about, among others, and then more established talents out of the UK that may not necessarily be known in other markets, like Skepta. Skepta is overall known, but maybe not necessarily as integrated in the US market, among others. But he had some really wonderful talent, LMI, that came to perform as well. Elmar that came to perform, among others. So that is a really, really, CK, I think, also performed. That's a really, really impressive showing of an artist who not only is understanding and absorbing the present, but also presence, and but also thinking about the future, and creating a pipeline to say, hey, and he was explicit even on stage, hey, these are the future artists that you should be paying attention to. So again, congratulations to him. Before I get into the next segment, I think what I want to do is take a quick break, and then I want to get into the next segment to start talking about you can do such amazing things and be successful on a global scale. And there's more to come. Wizkid is just getting started as far as I'm concerned. I think it's great what he's done, but we have a lot more to do and a long way to go. But it's one thing to get there, but it's another thing to be cognizant about the actions you take that hopefully doesn't derail that, right? Because derailing it means so much, not only for you, but certainly the movement. And I'll talk about, whether one talent should be responsible for carrying the entire continent. I'll talk about that shortly. But for right now, let's put a pin in it, take a quick break, and we'll start talking about, you have this amazing success that came out of it. And now you have this controversy that has been following it after it ended. So let's take a quick break. We'll be right back. And thank you for joining me on the AfricanMusicLaw.com show. I'm your host, Miss Uduak. We will be right back to continue our conversation. All right, welcome back. Thank you so much for hanging with us. And remember, if you want to comment, feel free to just leave your comments and I'll pull it up on the screen and read it. If you have questions you want to ask, please feel free to do so. Thank you for joining us on this day to discuss Wizkid and his success at the O2 Arena, and also what it means for the culture. So we've been talking about Wizkid O2 Arena made in Lagos concert. It was a 3-day concert, and his first attempt at a residency, if you will, was super successful, selling out with tickets, selling out with a 3-day show, putting on a great performance, and having some amazing guests show up as well to perform alongside him. So one of the amazing guests that he had was Tems. And Tems is an emerging artist who shuttled, or background in terms of shuttling between the UK and Nigeria, and has been able to find her voice, still relatively new, collaborated with Wizkid on the song titled Essence. I mean, her vocals alone are so powerful, and there's no way you cannot recognize her. And then when you actually listen to her album and the content of her music, there truly is a storyline. There's such maturity, and the music is really grown music, like really, really good stuff. I really like her music. One track that resonates with me a lot is Damages. The other one is Free Mind, among others. And then crazy things are happening. Just really talented. And by virtue of collaborating with Wizkid and the chemistry between both, the song Essence has done so well and has gotten global recognition, been on the Billboard charts and broken records in terms of an African record in terms of its performance, opened a lot of doors for Tems, certainly opened more doors for Wizkid. So it's such amazing success. Why are we even talking about a controversy involving Tems? Why is that even a discussion, right? She's been so successful with this. An established artist like Wizkid giving an opportunity for Tems to perform at his concert. Why are we even here? And so if you're joining us, we just finished talking about the impact Wizkid has had in his legacy and culture, on the culture, impact on the culture, and what his legacy may potentially be, and also everyone that's been a part of overall stakeholders, industry stakeholders. We can't go through naming everyone, but the movement that has brought us to where we are, a condensed, very short synopsis of that. And now we're talking about, okay, your talent and those who represent you have been able to help you get to this point and scale your brand. How do you ensure that you keep that brand sustainable and it's not a situation where you're finding yourself in crisis management and drawing on legal liability? Because even if you're not the one pointing it out, there are others who are watching your actions and that might have an issue with what you're doing. So why are we here? We're here with respect to the second leg of this conversation because while on stage with while Wizkid was on stage performing at the O2 Arena, a 3-day concert. He had all kinds of guests, including women, other women that were female artists that were on stage to perform. Now, he didn't lift his male artists, like literally pick them up. He didn't pick up other artists, other female artists, right? But for whatever reason, when it came to Tems, I can't remember which specific date it was, but it appears it might have been on the 3rd day of the concert. I'm not sure. But anyway, the final, I think it might have been on the final day of the concert. Again, I'm not sure about that. But the point is, while she was on stage with him, at some point when she came out to perform, he decided to lift her up. And, after the entire 3-day concert ended, right off the heels of it ending, someone released a clip, and the clip shows Wizkid with his hands positioned underneath her buttocks and trying to lift her up. And it also shows her basically pushing his hands and not allowing him do that, which then necessarily obviously forced him to let go for her to come to be down and continue her performance. So that clip was shared and it went viral. And what happened, I think, because when you look at the brand packaging of who Tems is, how she presents herself, her sound style, her image style, how her narrative on what she's about, it certainly is very disconcerting when you see that. And her fans were very, very disturbed about it. And before you know it, they started to demand that Wizkid apologize for sexually harassing Tems. They felt that it was sexual harassment and that there was no basis for that and it was inappropriate for him to do so. On the flip side, Wizkid's fans on the flip side said, no, it's not a big deal. He was just lifting her and not a big deal, et cetera, et cetera. Now, here's what I've observed for industry stakeholders, especially media. I will excuse particularly Linda Ikeji because I'm gonna roll her into this discussion. And she's not someone who, after this prior incident with Wizkid, even talks about or even gives him face on her platform, which is a very huge platform. She rarely ever covers him, and she did publicly, I believe, announce that moving forward she was no longer going to be doing so after the incident I'm going to talk about that happened some years back. But I've noticed some key media stakeholders. I'm not going to call their names out, but the key media stakeholders, a lot of them who have huge platforms, have not said anything about it. And I think you're doing a disservice to the industry by doing that. And overall, it's going to come back and bite us in the butt. And here's why. You can't think only short term. So a lot of this media folks sometimes are very, very like on a one-on-one basis, hobnobbing with a lot of the celebs. So when it comes to stories that should be objectively shared, they don't. And the reason why that hurts us is you got to remember our talents, from Wizkid to many others. We've seen issues that came up with Timaya when he was in Atlanta on sexual assault, among other things. You got to remember, we're not just playing only on a local level on the continent, where a lot of laws, particularly as it relates to women, are not even enforced. And you have issues of violence against women and all kinds of stuff. We are playing on a global level. And if you're playing on a global level, and particularly in Western markets, it is imperative upon you, whether you're a stakeholder or a direct representative of Wizkid or other stakeholders, to call out these issues, because you don't want our talent to be reprimanded on a global scale, and worse, stripped of everything they've worked hard for because of bad behavior that they may have. It may or may not be that this was intentionally done in a mean-spirited way. We don't know. But what we do know is the action occurred. And if it occurred, is that appropriate given the circumstances, given the realities, given the caliber of artists they both are, and also the parameters and customs and norms and practices when a fellow featured artist shows up on stage to perform with you? Is it appropriate for you to be lifting her up? What's the basis for that? And when she's pushing your hands away, does that say something about you, encroaching on boundaries? So we need to talk about this not only when we know, man no man situation, but objectively wear a hat that will not end up hurting us in the long run, because we can't on the inside, when it comes to cleaning house, keep our house in order. So if you protect, for example, the Tiwa Savages, the Wizkid, or whoever on the home front, when they are playing on global stage and this occurs, what are you going to do? Because you can't protect them anymore. But if you're not bold enough to say this was not okay, it's inappropriate, then you're setting them up down the line for failure. That's my perspective. If you disagree, certainly feel free to leave a comment. But that's my view on it. So going back to the Wizkid situation, he's since had a crisis. He hasn't said anything about it. Tems has attempted to clean it up by saying, you know what, basically we all make mistakes. And no matter what happens, I love him, he's my brother, as she put it. And that's all great and dandy. And Tems maybe can afford to do that from a perspective of, there are not many Nigerians out there, there are not many Africans out there on a global scale performing and being this successful. And this person gave me an opportunity. I don't want to derail it and by fanning up the flames. But if it's a different person and doesn't come from that perspective or background, and it's repeated on a different platform, it will be an issue. Yeah, it will be an issue. And certainly, one thing to look at with Wizkid is this is not the first time we keep hearing things that come up as it relates to his treatment of women. And that's why I talked about the Linda Ikeji one. Years back, there was an alleged assault made on his part towards her. Of course, she took it seriously, got law enforcement involved in the Nigerian end. It was sort of like the first time it was happening on that global scale because the story went viral. And in addition, when she did that, ultimately, Wizkid publicly apologized about it. And then she also made a decision moving forward. I'm not even covering stories about you anymore. Forget about it. The story she had covered was an alleged statement. It was an alleged statement that Wizkid did not purchase his home. She has a gossip blog. Did not purchase his home in Los Angeles, that it was in fact rented. Wizkid wasn't happy about it and went off on her and said some really horrible things. But part of what wasn't just saying horrible things, part of that was the allegation, was the implicit and explicit threat of physical harm. And that took it to a whole new level. So that's one part. We've also seen Wizkid do something similar with respect to women, is what we're talking about. Or maybe not do something similar, but allegation of, we had a major media personality who came out and in a 3-hour podcast that he was a co-host of and said some crazy things, long history of how Wizkid behaves towards women in the industry and that it's a problem and needed to be fixed. He ultimately took that podcast down, said his life was being threatened by a lot of people, and so he had no choice but to protect his family. So we're seeing a recurrence of those kinds of issues, and we should pay attention. We should pay attention, and we should demand objectivity in the behavior towards women and respect, because you can be at this high level performing, and the world is taking notice of you, but you can also fall just as quickly, period, and fall really hard when you don't clean up house. And for those who are in his camp, make it a duty consistently to, be objective. Don't be a yes man or yes woman towards him. And I would say one thing too, it was just a couple of years ago, his current manager, who also happens to now be the mother or one of the mothers of his children, at some point, she turns out, she says it was, someone hacked into her account, but, there was a story put out through her account about Wizkid's physical assault towards her and how she could no longer handle it, etc. It was just very viral and crazy within the African community, particularly in African media and all that. Again, there's a pattern. There's a pattern of allegations of acts towards women that are completely inappropriate. So even though we have this isolated incident, one could say it's isolated and one could say it's not a big deal. When you look at the patterns of these allegations, then it's necessary to nip it and say, hey, you know what? There's a red flag here, and you need to do a U-turn and be very cautious about your actions, because you're playing on this level that you've been playing on the home front, and it might not have major consequences. But if you do it here, especially in the Western world, and certainly in a market like the US, different ball game with ramifications that could also be not only civil liability, certainly criminal liability as well. That's what we're talking about here. So again, incumbent on all stakeholders to not just, whether it's Wizkid, Burna Boy, whoever you're managing, or Davido's, or emerging artists coming up, they need to understand that there's serious ramifications of their actions, even if when they're on the home front, they don't get those because of their status. But when they play in a different community and also have, the kind of deep pockets that they're now having, so that means they have money, that it's a different ball game if they don't get their house in order. So that's all I have to say on that. On the Wizkid, I think we first covered the amazing success and what it means for the culture and how wonderful it is. And then we've covered this part as well with Tems and the allegations of alleged harassment, sexual harassment towards her. It's a general good idea when you invite a featured artist, whether in the studio or outside of or on stage anywhere, to keep your hands to yourself, unless you do have a romantic relationship with that person and that person invites you to share. Certainly keep your hands to yourself and treat them the same way you treated every other artist on stage. I always say often, when we're doing, even if you are dating someone or married to someone, when it comes to business, it's still business. We're not trying to be lovey-dovey or romantic when we're in the middle of business. When we're done, there's a place for that. But when we're doing business, we're doing business. And I think the industry as a whole, we're now seeing more women emerge, particularly on the African front. And I think a big part of it is because a lot of our stakeholders are saying that women can be very, very successful, and you don't need to pity one woman against the other. There's room for a lot. And I think to that end, what we are seeing is that you have a lot more young women talents that are female talents that are coming up front. But our industry has been very male dominated, 99% male dominated. It's only now, and I would say the last 2 years, that we've seen an explosion of a lot of this indie record labels, what amounts to indie record labels, taking on women on their roster. At some point, I mean, Davido, being a global star, said, "There's no way I'm going to ever sign a woman." And when he was asked, it's because he said, "I'm not sure that I can just, objectively manage her. I may want to get into a relationship with her." And that, of course, became so controversial. He's since subsequently signed women, support women, and he's clearly had to do his own work there. So it's still a young industry that is very, very patriarchal and has a mindset of men dominating, but we definitely need to shift that. And when you are dealing with women, female artists, particularly whether you're a record label, a promoter, a DJ, whoever you are, male, you definitely need to keep your hands to yourself and respect the craft and be professional and be about that business. We're playing on a different scale. And if you continue to behave in a way that is inappropriate, I promise you, it's only a matter of time. And when that exposure does come on a global scale, it won't be pretty, not for you and not for the people behind you, but notwithstanding, you're the one that's going to carry the brunt of the consequences. So be mindful of that. Okay, we are done here. Thank you for joining me. I will see you all next time in the next episode. And thanks again for joining. And don't forget to subscribe. Go to africamusiclaw.com to subscribe, and have a good one. See you later. Cheers.